I love when Northwoods musicians introduce me to new music. Thank you. Being in the gap can be disorienting and even scary. Nothing to hold on to, no sense of direction, not even a hint of what choices and possibilities might lie ahead. But it was just this state of pure potential that existed before the universe was created. All you can do now is relax into this no thingness. Fall into the silence between the words. Watch this gap between the outgoing and incoming breath, and treasure every empty moment of the experience. Something sacred is about to be born. This is the reading that accompanies the fifth major arcana card in the Osho Zen tarot deck, which is a tarot deck that Sid introduced me to that we sometimes use in our collective family practices. And this no thingness exemplifies the state that we all think of and aspire to when we are practicing meditation, practicing mindfulness, practicing being present in a moment. I am not a friend of discipline. I have, for most of my adult life, considered myself to lack discipline, to be undisciplined, which is not always a bad thing. But it does get in the way of a few things. In my Master of Fine Arts program, my first career as a poet, my peers would talk about their daily writing practice. You know, I get up in the morning and I spend 30 minutes just writing anything that comes to mind, which is an idea from Julia Cameron's book, The Artist Way, which is a great book for people who want to use art as a method of mindfulness. It's Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. Or I had friends that would stay up all night and write, friends that would have very specific periods in the day throughout which they would practice their craft of writing. And I was never good at that. I went through an entire Master of Fine Arts program, wrote an entire book-length manuscript of poetry without ever having a daily writing practice. And so when I went into seminary, I struggled in the same way with spiritual practices. I lacked consistency. In many of my different classes, we were encouraged to take on a spiritual practice as part of the work we did in that class. And I would always try like 3 or 4 things over the course of the semester and not ever be able to stick to one thing. And so I always told myself that I wasn't very good at spiritual practices. I've always been an in the moment writer. And apparently I had the same approach to spiritual practices. I lack consistency. I used to not say that with a smile, but I've always been an in the moment writer, thinker, creator. The first draft of my sermons, as I have said before, is always a stack of Post-it notes and scraps of paper with words scribbled on them and a bunch of arrows connecting ideas. And when I start to get organized, there may even be numbers and possibly even like little letters following the numbers if I want to get really precise. I need to remind you guys of the sermon outline written on the back of a car insurance printout while standing over the hood of my car from a few weeks back. I am an in the moment kind of person. As a poet and as a spiritual being, but I'm repeating myself, I've always been more about when the inspiration strikes, spontaneous sense of things. But I also wrote a lot of formal, structured poetry, sonnets, villanelles, sestinas, terza rima, dactylic hexameter. I think I still know what all those things are. But there was something about being constrained by syllabic counts or metered lines or rhyme schemes or repetitions that left me free within it, free to play, free to experiment, to push against or play off the boundaries of the form until something that really fascinated me emerged. That's a lot like my pile of Post-it notes coming together to form a complete whole. Freedom within structure, pushing the boundaries of form and function to see what is possible. That is my most creative space. But that is not always the most helpful model with maintaining a consistent spiritual practice, even now. The questions I find most helpful are to ask myself, what am I needing? And how do I get it? When thinking about what qualifies as a spiritual practice in my mind. We heard earlier from one of my favorite Buddhist monks, Mingyur Rinpoche, who is another one of those names that could have been on our list from a couple of weeks ago of contemporary prophets. And for Mingyur Rinpoche, what do I need and how do I get it? Looked like a 4-year secret wandering retreat and a near-death experience. He was a master of a monastery, and one day he just disappeared and came back 4 years later, having been on a wandering retreat, much in the tradition of the Hindu yogis who would wander from place to place, accepting whatever food, whatever shelter, whatever support came their way, and learning to live without when it didn't. He chose to do this secret 4-year retreat and leave without telling anybody because of what his father had told him, who was also the leader of a spiritual group. When his father wanted to go on retreat, his students would beg him to return to the monastery because they'd know where he was because he was being responsible. The other teachers would encourage him to stay in the school, in the monastery. So his father told Mingyur Rinpoche that if he really wanted to do this, he shouldn't tell anyone. Said, don't tell anybody what you've been doing until you come back. And one of the things he experienced while he was out there in the world was not very far after the start of his wandering retreat. He got very sick and thought he might die. His health was so bad, he was sick, right? Definitely ate something he shouldn't have or drank something he shouldn't have. And he says, when I got sick, I felt like I went through some kind of wall of attachment to my body, my comfort, my robes, the idea of myself. And he let go of the idea of self, in which moment he found no fear. He described it as a dissolution where the body no longer exists. No emotion, no thought, no subject, no object. And then he passed out and he woke up in a clinic with a glucose IV in his arm. A few days later, felt better, got up and continued his wandering retreat. That's some dedication to what am I needing and how do I get it? He worked very hard to find his place of no thingness. Now, I'm assuming that none of us can disappear for 4 years. I'm not going to, don't worry. And I'm assuming that we would prefer to find enlightenment somewhere short of a near fatal bout of botulism. So this question of being disciplined, what does it mean for us? We live in a world that is hardwired for distraction. We carry around little distraction machines everywhere we go. I don't know about you, but it's not uncommon for me to be watching a TV show while looking through some looking something up on my phone and scrolling through social media and having a conversation with my wife and throwing a toy for my dogs all at the same time. And this is my mode of relaxation. So no wonder my brain, and perhaps yours as well, is constantly full. And my soul is always craving rest and quiet. Spiritual practices are a type of spiritual discipline that can help us carve out those spaces. And I'm really bad at shutting my brain off. I am bad at consistency. We've been through this. I am bad at discipline. But I have a secret theory, which is about to not become a very secret theory. No one thinks that they are good at spiritual discipline. Not even the every morning meditator, the daily journaler, the 5 p.m. yogi. No one thinks they've gotten it right. Have you ever heard someone say, I think I'm good with my spiritual practice. I'm doing a great job and I have plenty of time for it. It's doing exactly what I need in my life. Some of you might say that. Perhaps Mingyur Rinpoche would say that. But I kind of doubt it, because spiritual practice is not about accomplishing, it is about practicing. And practice, contrary to popular belief, does not make perfect. Ask any artist or musician if it is easier now to create than it was when they first started. What a practice does is refine a process. And with every obstacle we overcome, there is always another mountain. Hence my theory. No one thinks they are good at spiritual discipline. I am not. There's a reason that an important part of my early sermon prep to get the ideas going is to go on YouTube and watch about 90 seconds of 10 different TED Talks. I used to beat myself up because a lot of times nothing from those TED Talks actually goes into the sermon at all. But invariably, I'll get a really good Post-it note or two full of really useful words and scribbles and arrows that do make their way into the message. Is this a discipline? It seems very undisciplined, very inconsistent, but I do it almost every time. Perhaps discipline doesn't have to look like discipline. I said earlier, I am not a friend of discipline. I am a friend of my monkey mind, though. And I wonder a lot about what does it look like for these things to coexist? Part of my struggle with maintaining a consistent, disciplined spiritual practice is that I'm not willing to settle for a spiritual practice in which my monkey mind can also not exist, which is why I always have 4 or 5 different things that I am choosing from at any given point in time. When I was back in seminary, I had this image in my mind of what I wanted my spiritual practice to look like. I was in a room with lots and lots of natural light and like a bamboo in the corner and some really nice meditation music playing. And it's like 5 a.m. and or 6 a.m, the sun's up. I have a cup of tea and I'm about to do some yoga. But at some point I realized my life looks nothing like that. I didn't live in a house that had a lot of natural light. I had one piece of bamboo. I didn't really listen to meditative music, and I drink coffee, not tea. What I had in my mind about what a spiritual practice should look like was not my life. It wasn't me. And so no wonder I felt like I was always failing. Feeling like you're always failing at something in my life, that is an indicator of one of 2 things. I am either doing the wrong thing or I am doing the right thing the wrong way. So I pivot. Yes, your minister too is always in beta. So I started thinking about discipline differently. And this practice has not led to perfection, I'm relieved to say, but it has led to progress. There is a part of the monkey mind that I do not love, that is not my friend. It is the one that is more like an analyst who judges everything with the purpose not of improvement or enlightenment, but of criticism. There is nothing more destructive to spiritual work than a drumbeat of your shortcomings rolling through your brain. But if you make friends with your shortcomings and friends with your monkey mind, together you can conspire to find the right definition of discipline. Monkey-friendly discipline is the kind of structure in which you can be free to play, have fun, eat bananas. Much like the formal poetry that I was drawn to in my life as a poet, discipline can be made of the things that work, not the things we think we should be doing. Because especially in our spiritual lives, the imposition of some kind of arbitrary form or function is more likely to serve as a hindrance than a help. The structures within which we discipline ourselves work better when they work with us instead of against us. So discipline is kind of a hard word for a lot of us to grasp because we have an idea of discipline as punitive, judgmental, right? You should be disciplined. And then we also tell spiritual practitioners that they should be disciplined too. And it can create a little bit of confusion in our minds. But discipline shares a common root with another word that gets used a lot in religious life on all sides of the globe. And that word is disciple. A disciple is a learner. And a disciple is also a follower. So what are you learning? What are you following? A discipline that is learned from your life, that follows the ways of your brain and the way your heart and your body work. That is discipline that looks like life. That's a structure in which we have enough room to move without becoming unmoored. This idea of discipline as discipleship, it's about learning something. It is also about following something. It's also about accountability. Your discipline is something to which you hold yourself accountable, rather than accountability to some arbitrary other or to the vision of the shoulds of our spiritual life. Accountable to yourself, to your own sense of the divine, to your own life's calling. The answers to those questions are how you begin to shape what discipline can mean for you. What am I needing? And how do I get it? That is the place we start. And we have an extra tool, I think, for this as Unitarian Universalists. Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal faith. And this faith community is built on a shared belief, not about God or the struggle between good and evil or the purpose of life, but about a shared belief about how we are to be together, a shared commitment to living that way. Our strength as a faith community is in direct proportion to our fidelity to those promises, and maybe even more so to how we go about repairing harm caused when we inevitably fall short of our highest aspirations. Remember, practice does not make perfect, it only makes progress. So I invite you to think about spiritual discipline in the same covenantal mindset, to approach yourself with the same love that you approach others in the community, same compassion and desire for understanding, with the same trust that wisdom emerges from the process of becoming exactly who we are. I shared with you earlier a spiritual practice of praying in color, but I know that not everybody processes in the same way. I want to share with you a few of the questions that I reflect on when I am thinking about my spiritual life. And I will add these to the chat as well. Have I encountered obstacles to maintaining the kind of practice I'd hoped for? What have those obstacles been? What does discipline mean to me now? What has been my experience with discipline? How does discipline help or hinder my spiritual practice? What does a personal covenant mean to me? What vows, promises, and commitments can I make to myself? These are some questions to consider when thinking about what form the function of your spiritual life takes. Now, if you had a different minister, you would have gotten a very different message today. There are many ministers and many UUs who maintain rigorous discipline. I know folks who get up at 5 a.m. to meditate, if not always happily, at least consistently. There are UUs who spend an hour or two each day in contemplative reading, who take mindful and intentionally reflective long walks, who practice daily yoga, who maintain regular creative schedules. And if you had a different minister, you might have heard a message today that emphasized the value of consistency, of regularity, of fidelity to a specific action or mindset, of regularity. But your minister has a mind like a squirrel, a Post-it note process. And for your squirrely minded minister, discipline, accountability, fidelity means that I must honor that squirrely mind, even as I seek the moments that will transcend it. We are all a balance of chaos and cosmos, of order and disorder. Choosing one over the other is not a path to balance. It is a path to confusion. Discipline asks, what will you give yourself to? And spiritual practices ask, how can we get closer to our deepest, most authentic selves? And a spiritual discipline that looks like life frames the answer in ways that we can live with, as well as live into, so that something sacred can be born in us.